Hello, you're listening to the Army Historical Foundation's official Army History podcast. I'm your host, Dallas Looney, digital historian with the Foundation. Today, we're going to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States' independence. I'm joined today with two special guests. Alex, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Sure. My name is Alex Cain. I am a historian who specializes in the events of April 19th, 1775, particularly focusing on the Massachusetts militia system. I own and run a blog and podcast called Historical Nerdery. And in the real world, I am the executive director of apprenticeship pathways at North Shore Community College. I'm responsible for building out apprenticeships in allied health and skilled trades.
Excellent. And our other guest, Joel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Joel Bohy. I grew up in Concord on the edge of the battlefield. And like Alex, I became hooked on the buildup to the revolution, April 19th, 1775, the siege of Boston, and working on some of the similar types of things he's been working on, researching the Army, how it was formed, as well as the material culture, the weapons used, and the ballistics of those weapons, and using archaeology to tie that in with the documentary evidence. In real life, I appraise antique arms and militaria, and I'm an appraiser on the PBS series Antiques Roadshow.
Excellent. So I thought with the 250th that we could cover a little bit of history regarding the Army and its position back during the Revolutionary War. Since I have the both of you, I'd love to ask a series of questions. The first being the Army is obviously tied directly to the founding of this nation, plays a pretty pivotal role. Could you briefly describe some of the history behind the creation of the Army, starting with you, Alex?
Sure. So in order to understand the creation of the Army, you got to take a real deep dive into the, and we're going to focus on Massachusetts for this conversation. You got to take a deep dive into the legal and constitutional system of the militia system. It actually dates back to about the 11th century England, and it continued through a series of revisions and transitions leading up to the English Civil War in the English homeland and dealing with King Philip's War in the New England colonies. The militia system initially was a home defense. That's what they're designed for, is a home defense. But following the English Civil War and following the development of King Philip's War and the English Civil War, there was a development on the constitutional level where you saw the militia system as one of the guardians of constitutional rights of English liberties. And so, even though by the French and Indian War, the Massachusetts militia system had devolved into basically a social club, there was this sort of still supporting constitutional theory that the militia was the bedrock of defending English rights and English constitutional civil liberties. So when you see in 1774, when the Crown completely strips Massachusetts of their constitutional rights by basically revoking the Massachusetts Charter of 1691, which is the equivalent from the colonist point of view of the Bill of Rights today. The charter had everything from rights to trial by jury, right to representation in government, etc. When the Crown stripped Massachusetts Bay Colony as part of the Coercive Acts of 1774, Massachusetts realized they were going to war with England. And as a result, they turned as their first line of defense towards the militia system. Now, I'm going to lead up to, because I suspect Joel is going to get into the Massachusetts Grand Army and the transition during the siege. But the militia played this pivotal role. They took this responsibility very seriously, and you do see this rapid mobilization and rapid transformation that takes place across all the communities in Massachusetts during this time. You see communities passing resolutions that their militia has to drill much more frequently. You see creations of a Minuteman system, which didn't spring out of nowhere. The Minuteman system had existed since Plymouth Bay Colony was settled. But you see a revitalization of the Minuteman concept. You see this cottage industry coming out where saddlers, coopers, woodworkers are all contributing to the wartime effort in making equipment, modifying weapons, actually going out and simply buying bricks of lead so they get melted down for ammunition. And so you see this movement in preparation to defend those civil rights and liberties. And at the same time, the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, which is the rebel government during this time, is actually starting by about February, and even maybe a little earlier. I'll defer to Joel, but even a little earlier, they were starting to lay the foundation for what was called a Massachusetts Grand Army, where the militia was essentially your first line of defense if something hits the fan before they could get this Grand Army up and running. And you see as the siege progresses, this movement towards a full continental army. But I'll turn it over to Joel because I babbled long enough.
Well, no, actually, getting into the early stuff, because that's a lot of people don't realize that the militia system was around for so long. The fact that Minutemen companies, or that organization, had been around for so long, and they think that on April 19th, that farmers just grabbed their guns from over the fireplace and went out and beat the British Army, and that's just not the case. Massachusetts, as Alex said, had started when the Provincial Congress formed on October 7th, 1774. They rapidly got into getting supplies together to form an army. And they looked at what they had in stock, which wasn't much. And then they formed a committee to start purchasing and getting these supplies. And they ended up stockpiling them in Concord, along with Worcester and other places. And hence the reason why the British actually marched out to Concord. But what they were able to do was absolutely amazing. As Alex said, in February, they begin to ask for all of the companies, militia companies and minute companies in Massachusetts, to send in returns of how they were armed and equipped, town stocks of arms and ammunition. And they also ordered more supplies to be made, including 15,000 canteens, which were made within 2 months, less than 2 months, and shipped to Concord to be stored for when the Army actually formed. On April 5th, they approved rules and regulations for the Massachusetts Army, which on April 5th didn't exist yet. So they were preparing for this. They knew the spark was going to happen, and they knew the war was going to begin. It was just going to be a matter of when.
Hmm. So the transition from militias into an organized army, why was that important? Obviously, from a battle standpoint, you can't have a bunch of independent militias take on the British Army. But I'm curious to get your historical opinions on that.
Yeah, so when you take a look at, first of all, let's look at the purpose of a militia. A militia serves essentially three purposes. The first one, as I alluded to, the political theory, that they are the defenders of a constitutional system. Secondly, is they're a logistical pool. In other words, during the French Wars, prior to the American Revolution, and even during the American Revolution, you often drafted your provincial soldiers and recruits, or your continental soldiers and recruits, from the militia system. So they served as a recruiting body. On top of that, also, the purpose of a militia is a home guard. They are there to mobilize and respond to an immediate in your neighborhood response. In the wars leading up to the American Revolution, you actually have what we call militia committees. I do equate the committees of safety during the pre-revolutionary time as a militia committee. But you look at the militia committees, they were responsible for giving authorization whether a militia company could even leave their town. So there's a lot of layers on that. When you look at Lexington and Concord in the early stages of the siege of Boston, these are troops that, at best case scenario, and I have seen some town documentation where they were prepared to put their militia companies in the field for up to 2 weeks. They had a pay structure in place, they had a food supply system in place. But a lot of these militia companies are not prepared for long-term campaigns. They are a short-term solution. They were very successful on April 19th because they were fighting in their backyard, and they moved with the retreating column. But once they got outside of Boston, the militia companies, a lot of them start realizing that they may be here for the long term, and they're not prepared for the long term. They have obligations back home. They have supplies that they're short of. And they're thinking to themselves, well, maybe someone else should volunteer for this particular work. And again, you see Massachusetts Provincial Congress and Artemus Ward, who at that time was the overall commander of the New England forces outside of Boston, he's starting to panic by around May 5th, 75, where he's saying, my army is dissolving before my eyes. And he was very concerned that he was going to lose them. So again, you see this transition finally taking place by beginning of late April, beginning of May, with this transition into the Grand Army, where they are trying to find troops who will serve for the duration of the year, hoping that the siege will be broken and the conflict will end before December of 75.
Yeah, on April 20th, there was a council of war in Cambridge, and many of the officers were there. You know, their first order of business was to get provisions flowing. So they sent out word to Concord to start getting the supplies, Concord and other towns. I don't want to leave out the other towns that were involved, and getting the supplies into the siege itself. The last order of business on that meeting was to go bury the bodies of the British soldiers that were left behind. But after that point, it was important that they did form what they had been preparing for before the fight actually broke out. So on April 23rd, they set up an enlistment process. And like Alex said, some of those men in the militia enlist into new companies that become the Massachusetts Army, while the militias are still in their town. And as he said, they become a pool, not just for the Massachusetts Army, but later for the Continental Army to fill the ranks for service. But it is an important system, and as Alex said, they are getting people that are leaving. Artemus Ward did freak out a little bit that the army's dwindling. He doesn't want anybody to go home. He's waiting for more troops from Connecticut. And it was really important that they tried to hold this group of men together to keep the British closed up in Boston.
Mhm. Were there any battles that really solidified the difference between the Continental Army and these local militias? Was there a iconic battle that really solidified the purpose of the army?
Well, for me, I'm going to call it a non-iconic battle because it's not really known, because it's sandwiched between Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill, and that's the Battle of Chelsea Creek, that's also known as Noddle's Island. This is a battle that was fought in late May of 75, and it's actually part of a forage campaign where the Massachusetts Grand Army and the Massachusetts Provincial Congress decided that they saw that the British Army trapped in Boston could not go out into the countryside to get forage for supplies anymore because they're surrounded. So as a result, they have to go to various harbor islands outside of Boston that actually have farms and supplies stored on them to start foraging. So you see towards the end of May 75, Artemus Ward orders multiple regiments to Chelsea, Massachusetts, and then to cross over in low tide to Noddle Island and Hog Island to start removing cattle and start removing supplies to deny the British of these supplies. The interesting thing is this is the first joint effort between colonies during the American Revolution. You have troops that are from New Hampshire, you have troops that are from Massachusetts. I'm excited because Fry's regiment, which is in my backyard up here in Essex County, Massachusetts, actively fought in this engagement. And then you also have troops from Connecticut. It's also the first occasion where artillery is used during the engagement. And finally, because this is an Army series, it is a United States, well, actually, it's a New England Army versus the Navy, because what you have is a battle between American forces and the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy lands Marines on the island with supported by Grasshopper artillery pieces. There's this initial skirmish fight at which the HMS Diana tries to chase the Americans up Chelsea Creek during a king's tide, which is an unusually high tide. And of course, the tide starts going out, and the Diana finds itself surrounded on hillsides in a sort of a narrow bay by American forces pouring fire down. They were able to retire from that bay, but then got grounded on a sandbar, at which point the American forces started to torch the ship. Long story short, it ended up as a disaster for the Royal Navy, very embarrassing situation. And the Americans were successful. And unfortunately, that engagement, I do consider it an important moment in defining the Army because of the intercolonial coordination. You had John Stark, who was present. You had Israel Putnam. You had James Fry. It's some of the known and lesser known military commanders who are coordinating together to basically give the British a good bloodying.
Yeah, and the other thing about Chelsea Creek is almost nobody knows about it. And it's one of the things that's really important. It's an important pivotal event during the siege of Boston, weeks before the Battle of Bunker Hill. And again, nobody really knows about it. And there are a ton of great diary entries and newspaper articles about what happened there. But it's very rarely talked about, even here for both of us being in Massachusetts. If you mention the Battle of Chelsea Creek or Nautils Island, 99.9% of the people wouldn't even know what it was.
Hmm. The both of you mentioned sort of these historical figures during the Revolutionary War. Do any of them stand out to you, other than George Washington, that embodies the Army's mission of discipline, duty, honor?
I think Joel would be shocked if I did not say Captain John Parker of the Lexington Company. This guy is it's interesting. John Parker's an interesting figure because there's a lot of myth around him that's not true. His great granddaughter and great grandson in the 1890s claimed for the first time he was a veteran of the French and Indian Wars. That was not the case. 20th century historians um, expanded upon that and suddenly said he was a veteran of the Siege of Louisburg as well. He had no real military experience prior to the battles of Lexington and Concord. There's a lot of theory, which I've talked about in my own books. Why did he stand on the green? It comes down to, I think, precedent. There's various accounts of other militia companies engaging in acts of observation as a military body is marching through their town or marching nearby. I think that was his mindset until the proverbial poo hit the fan and his company was actually decimated at the Battle of Lexington. And the thing is, as I've always said, John Parker could have sat it out at that particular day, and I don't think anyone would have judged him any less for what happened. He could have said, "My company was decimated. We suffered massive losses. We're pretty much going to take a defensive position somewhere away from the engagement." However, somehow, and unfortunately, we don't know what he said, but somehow he convinced his company to re-enter the fight. It's a study of rallying demoralized troops and defeated troops and convincing them to re-enter an engagement. And he does that, and they proceed to march 2 miles to a tactical location that, thanks to Joel and his team's archaeological research, revealed he picked a strategic choke point where the various units had to come in to basically converge onto a bridge to cross over, and Parker and his men were waiting for them and fired a decimating volley across their ranks. He then had a strategic exit point as well, where they most likely followed a bridle path off their position and retired and were able to re-engage the enemy again. And the neat thing we talked about a little bit earlier, Parker's men pursued the enemy to Cambridge based upon some recent pension applications I uncovered about a year or two ago. And they stayed outside roughly for about 6 to 10 days. And to keep his men going where the town was decimated, the property was burned, looted, soldiers were killed, neighbors were suffering from debilitating wounds. For him to achieve that accomplishment on April 19th, I say he is an ideal Army officer. And I do know multiple Army ROTC organizations out of New Hampshire and Massachusetts go down to Lexington Green and Parker's Revenge site annually to do staff rides on training their cadets on how to rally a demoralized unit, convince them to re-enter a fight.
Yeah, you're right. Parker is definitely, as far as combat goes, and I know Alex is going to be really shocked when I say this. Mine would be for this time period, Colonel James Barrett from Concord, Massachusetts. He had served in the militia for years. On April 19th, he was the one up on the muster field who ordered the troops down to the bridge, but ordered them not to fire unless they were fired on. But more importantly than that, he led a lot of the logistical work that was going on, the supplies, where they were stored, getting those into the siege. In June of 75, he becomes a member of the Committee of Supplies, which, with everything he had going on, must have been a huge task for him. So not only do you need the leaders in combat, but you also need the leaders that are going to help with all the logistics, because without provisions, ammunition, arms, the Army can't survive. And so for me, I agree with Alex 100% on that. But mine would be James Barrett.
Excellent choices. Leadership, of course, is vital to the Army. And I think you can see in those early stages some incredible leaders being formed out of the conflict. Uh, so the both of you have extensive experience in our field. Do you have any particular historical stories that you'd like to share that relate to the Continental Army? Just these could be fun, these could be, just basic soldiers, officers, what have you.
There's one, I would, I was thinking about this as you were asking the question. I think one person who stands out as a soldier from the Battle of Bunker Hill, and that's James Trussell. And basically, he was with Stark's regiment. He was in Isaac Baldwin's company, which was raised predominantly from Rockingham County, New Hampshire, and Merrimack County, New Hampshire. He was about 21 years old at the time of the fight, never saw combat beforehand. He's with Stark as they're running across Charlestown Neck. They're being raked by artillery fire from the Royal Navy, including grape shot. Somehow, Stark and his regiment completely make it across unscathed, which was a miracle. They then go down to the rail fence and they form a defensive line on the rail fence, which Trussell was located along there. And what you see is he participates in the battle and successfully retires from the neck with his company. And when they get across the neck to safety, they suddenly realize that their captain had been left behind, wounded on the field. For good or bad, the company then proceeded to have a town meeting to decide whether they're going to recross the neck and rescue him. And they ultimately agreed to do so. And Trussell is with them racing across the neck. I'm not sure if it's before or after I suspect it's at some point. He's hit by grape shot. And as a result, his left hand is blown off. And he describes in a later account that all he had left was just a flap of skin that a surgeon had to repair when he was carried back to the field. It's a tragic incident because, this changes his life forever. He cannot can't serve in the military anymore. Can't work in any skilled trades because he's now disabled. But the community comes together, and it's his mother and a minister that teach him how to become a teacher. So he becomes a local school teacher, and he spends the rest of his life up in New Hampshire, becoming teaching school children and teaching how to read and write. And so for him, the two things that always stayed in his life and his writings that I've read was one that this going across that neck and being wounded, because he did suffer some military disability, and he had to have another doctor repair the work that the first surgeon had done. But the second thing was his level of gratefulness towards his mother and the community to actually sort of rally around the guy and help this disabled veteran, become a teacher. And as a final footnote, which I really nerded out on, and I remember sending Joel the pictures, his musket still survives. It's a filing piece that is currently located in New London, New Hampshire. It appears that the stock was cut back to accept the bayonet. But the really cool thing is somebody, whether it was Moses or James or somebody, engraved Bunker Hill on the stock, which was really a nice memory. And the piece is in wonderful, wonderful condition. I was up in New London about a week or two ago, and I was hoping to see it again, but they said it was elsewhere, so I couldn't visit it. So that's who I would say is probably one unique story that stood out in all my research recently.
Moses Trussell's gun is fantastic, and
I know I screwed up the name.
That's all right. That's all right. I had a chance to go look at it last year when I was giving a presentation up there, and it's going to be in my next publication. I have great photos of it now. But that story is a great example of someone. I think mine would be John Robbins, who was a member of Captain John Parker's company, who stood on Lexington Green in the morning. And while he wasn't a Continental soldier per se, he was in the front rank when Captain John Parker ordered the men to disperse on the green. And as he dispersed, the light infantry fired, and a ball went to the right of his spine, up through his neck, and took out his lower jaw. And he survived at least until the 1790s. We don't know because he vanishes. But he left behind a bunch of petitions because, again, there was no VA. There was no way to take care of these men. So he had to pay his own doctor's bills. So he continually petitioned, and there's doctor's notes. There's also sorts of things in there that give us a lot of great information about him. And a few years ago, during some of our live fire studies, we actually recreated that shot to the best of our ability. And it's absolutely horrific. But the fact that he survived, he had 5 children and a wife at the time, and he couldn't support them because he couldn't move his right arm ever again, and obviously he could never eat again. So for me, I'm very fond of studying field grade officers and lower NCOs and privates, their story, which often doesn't get told, like Moses Trussell. And so for me, I think it would be John Robbins.
Both are incredible stories. So obviously you can see from our two guests here just the amount of information that they both have, especially about Boston and the surrounding area. And on that topic, the foundations previously worked with you both for our last year, our Boston Battle Ride. It was excellent. And I just wanted to touch as we approach the 250th. Each of you have a number of projects that you're working on. And I was curious to know, what are some of those projects?
I got a couple of things going on. I'm still actively involved with historical nerdery. I've actually slowed down the publications a little bit to work on a book I'm currently working on. The book is tentatively entitled, For God's Sake, Fire, the Massachusetts Militia System on the Eve of Lexington and Concord. I'm pretty much taking a legal, political, historical, and logistical and tactical view of the militia system. And I actually did go back to the 12th century and work my way forward. Right now, I'm on my 4th chapter, which is a constitutional system of the militia system and the purpose of the militia system in defending English rights. After that, I'm anticipating switching over to the logistical and organizational view of the militia. I haven't decided where I'm going to end on the book. I initially thought I'll end in 1776, but Joel has convinced me to go to the Battle of Rhode Island, so I've really screwed myself. Another project that's actually came up, I'm heavily involved in Newburyport activities, promoting the privateer systems that were in there. I've started working with a couple of museums over there on some of their privateer activities. And finally, because maybe I've been influenced by Joel, I was recently approached by the town of Amesbury to see if I could help them identify where their town commons were, where the militias of Amesbury would have mobilized. So now suddenly this movement within Essex County to possibly start using the LiDAR system or historical data to identify various town commons where the militias may have mobilized. That's a project way down the road, but I'm actually now teaching myself LiDAR because Joel has influenced me to get into archaeological and forensic studies. So those are my projects besides, trying to get names right of historical persons in my hairline.
Well, it's so easy to forget with so many names dancing around in your head, But no, I've been working on, I've got another book going, which is basically the build up to the war using some of the same types of things that Alex is talking about, but not the deep dive he's doing into it. Just basic information on the laws, but then talking about the outbreak of the revolution through Bunker Hill, through the eyes of the people who were there, and also using objects, some never published before, including Moses Trussell's gun, the art of Don Troiani, who I've been working with now for 35 years, and also an aftermath of each chapter, Bunker Hill and April 19th, talking about the burials, objects that have been dug out of graves in the past, and putting that whole story together. A few months ago or a month ago, I was on an archaeological project at Minuteman National Park on part of the Battle Road, which I can't really discuss yet because the park has to release that info. And then I just came off of 2 weeks on the Bunker Hill Archaeology Project with City of Boston Archaeology, where I was the material culture and historian consultant, working with American Veterans Archaeological Recovery, who I've worked with many times now before, a wonderful organization. which run by veterans, which teaches veterans how to use proper archaeological methodologies and helps get them into the field, to jobs in the field. Can't say enough great things about them. And it seems like every other day something new keeps popping up that gets in the way of the books. So lots going on right now for both of us.
Absolutely. Now I believe the both of you are working on a joint project together. Could you disclose a little bit about that?
No.
Well, it's over. No.
Yeah, this actually, when Joel approached me last year, I was very excited because, I think Joel knows this. I've said in some of my talks, if he doesn't, I'm going to share it now. No, I was ready to give up on Lexington and Concord, I think back in 2014, 2015, and focus on something new. And he said, "What are you, crazy? There's so much that hasn't been discovered. There's so much that's still out there. The stories that need to be told." And so and that stuck with me, and that reinvigorated me. And so when Joel approached me last year and said, "Hey, the Army has this potential idea," I was thrilled to partner with Joel. I think, despite our sarcastic back and forth, when we do collaborate, we make a wonderful team. I think we come from different approaches. Mine more, again, legal and logistical, and dealing with, the ins and outs of maybe some local history, where Joel is coming from the archaeological and the material culture approach. It really presents a great opportunity to share, unknown knowledge with new people. And when we got to do that last year, we were absolutely thrilled. And we do have discussions of evil plans of doing other stuff like symposiums and some other tours. But the opportunity to come back with the Army again and do another battlefield tour, where we gave our perspectives and what we knew from our research on Lexington, Concord, even just the tactics and the fact that the archaeological findings support what our theories are on the military tactics, is absolutely wonderful. And I get excited about it. And it's something we're looking forward to working with the Army again. And if I could quit my full-time job and hang out with Joel all the time, I gladly would. And I think my wife would say, "Joel can keep me."
Well, when we were approached about this, we figured, there was another person needed, and instantly I knew who to contact. And I didn't know whether he would have the time, but I'm glad that he did, because, we are looking at some similar things, but we're looking at them differently. And what I found fascinating about it, and this hit me on the tour, is Alex would talk about something from a law perspective or militia law perspective, or a document that he had read. And then I had stuff from material culture, as well as the archaeology, that made it all more dimensional for the guests. And it made it more dimensional for me. So I thought that we work really well together, and we hope that there's going to be another tour coming up run by the Army Historical Foundation, that we can both collaborate again, because anytime we can get to do this type of stuff, it's great. And the other thing that was great about the last tour, and we do it again, is, when we're done at the end of the day, we don't just take off and go to our rooms. We sit downstairs and talk to the guests, because usually there's a lot more questions. And it's a great time to sit down and really get a face-to-face with people on the tour and give them a lot more information, more to think about. And it, for us, we love talking about it. I know Alex and I can both give people ear cancer. So, it's a perfect opportunity to get really enveloped in the whole thing, and not just, once we get off the bus, that's it. We're not speaking to you till tomorrow. It's just a great way to do it, where everybody can enjoy it, and get their questions across, because sometimes the guests may not remember something when they're on the bus, but when they're sitting in the lobby, they'll come over and go, "Hey, Alex,
Yeah.
what about this?" And so it's just a great way to do a tour.
Absolutely. Seeing the both of you last year, absolute blast. And as you mentioned, some people are just more shy. They'll approach you in private rather than out in front of everyone else. So I know you're both busy, so we're going to close it off with a final question. Of course, it relates to the 250th. Why is it important to remember those who fought in the Revolutionary War? What is the purpose of remembering the 250th to the both of you?
From the military perspective, it's more than just, George, as you said, more than George Washington or the pomp and circumstances around signing the Declaration of Independence. We have across the spectrum, we have men, teenagers, young adults, women who sacrifice their all for this cause. It's something people don't realize as we've looked at. When you have a wounded soldier, that they're not just drawing blood or spilling blood for the nation. That people are affected by that. People are making the ultimate sacrifice for what they believe was the common cause, and the common cause initially was, these English liberties, and then it evolved into American independence. So I think people should realize that, again, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, as there should be, but it's the everyday person's story that really needs to get out there. And that's why you should honor that. It's enslaved persons, patriots of color. You had civilians who were caught in the storm of war. You have young men, boys, and older men who are all making the sacrifice on a battlefield or supporting a logistical operations or at sea. And these stories need to be shared and celebrated, because without their sacrifice, we wouldn't be here today. We'd probably be another Dominion of Canada or something.
Well, I think from my perspective, given all of the political divisiveness of today, I think that this is more important than ever that we go back to our roots and how it happened. And we look at those, like Alex said, who were badly wounded, and I do a lot of talks about this. We celebrate April 19th and Bunker Hill Day with banners and bunting, and that's great. But we have to remember the soldiers, the common soldiers, the enlisted men, the families who have to deal with loss, and have dealt with loss all the way up until now. And I think this is an important thing we need to do. We need to remember this and not forget everything that's happened from, the founding of, I won't just say Massachusetts, because Alex and I are kind of partial to our state, but through the whole country. And people need to remember that. And maybe that will help us in some ways come together a little bit more in today's world.
Beautifully said. So as we close out, I just want to run this by again. Alex, do you have a website? Do you have a place that people can go to if they want more information?
Sure. My website is historicalnerdery.com is my website. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram under the Historical Nerdery handle.
Perfect. And Joel?
And my website is being built as we speak. I don't have one yet, but I am on Instagram and Facebook under my name. Easy to find. And between both of us, Alex and I, we're constantly posting really what I find fascinating stuff. Others may not. My wife, glazes over when she looks at it. But
Mine too.
but in the end, I really enjoy looking at Alex's stuff. And in today's world, when there's so much bad stuff being posted on social media, it's really good to find something you can dive into and really get interested in. So,
absolutely. Well, I want to thank the both of you for joining me today. And if you want more information on Army history, you can go to our website at www.armyhistory.org. Thank you again for listening to our podcast. If you're interested in Army history, we have a collection of Army history articles, videos, and other forms of media available at www.armyhistory.org. Specifically for the articles and videos, direct your attention towards the Army History Center on our website. Thank you again for listening to our podcast. This officially wraps up our first full season. We're already hard at work on season 2, which will be released sometime in fall or winter of this year. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please feel free to email us at podcast@armyhistory.org. Thanks again.